Have you ever had a time in your life when you failed, even though you did everything right? This is exactly what happened to Honda. Despite years of effort and all the Italian bulls they beat on paper, they failed. You might say it depends on how you measure success, and you'd be right. Let's examine this unsuccessful but most successful car and decide. If you're ready, I'll give the intro.
Acura. Some things are worth the price.
In the 1980s, Honda was experimenting. They had the idea of creating an affordable, easy-to-drive, inexpensive supercar in which they could transfer the experiences and engines they gained in Formula races. Of course, this had to be the Japanese and Honda way. One of the projects had involved moving away from Honda's stock-in-trade, which was front-wheel drive, front-engined cars. The engineers bunned an engine in the back of a first-gen Honda City hatchback, driving the rear wheels, and were pleasantly surprised to find that it was fun to drive around. This particular project was shelved. Unfortunately, it may have been the Renault Clio 6 in action for several decades, but the concept remained entrenched in engineers' minds. Meanwhile, Honda had been working with Italian styling legends Pininfarina on a few ideas, most notably 1984's HPX concept. This was a doorless composite two-seater inspired by ground effect aerodynamics, which were quite the thing in Formula One. Unfortunately, the HPX did not see the light of day, but we got something much nicer instead. The NSX was an extremely risky project for Honda, a company that in the late 1980s was nowhere near the corporate juggernaut that it is today. Honda as a company devoted $140 million to the NSX project, half of which would go to developing the car, and the remainder of which would go to building a new state-of-the-art factory to assemble it Honda's own goals for the NSX. They didn't want to sacrifice the needs of the driver to the expected demands of performance. Demands that they felt didn't have to be there in making a truly top-level performance machine. The R&D team wanted a car that could hang with heavyweight exotics in a straight line, play with smaller and more lightweight sports cars in the curves, and cruise in serenity on the freeway. Essentially, they wanted it all, and the brief was to have a car that could do everything without compromise. Said goal was not just wishful thinking at the time, it was actually considered impossible, at any price. There was no way in hell anyone could make a car lightweight, comfortable, ergonomic, quiet, loud, sporty, aggressive, and powerful, all at the same time. Contemporary exotic cars. The Ferrari 328 and 348, Lotus Esprits, Porsche 911S, and Chevrolet Corvettes all had huge compromises in various departments, and that's just the way a supercar had to be. These quirks were part of the so-called exotic car experience, and drivers and reviewers welcomed them because they couldn't imagine it being any other way. Plus, the idea of Honda making a supercar. Everyone laughed when they heard the notion. Honda didn't make supercars, they made cheap economy hatchbacks and scooters. It just wouldn't happen, or so they thought. The project was codenamed New Sports Experimental. Its composition matched the rest of the car. It was to be the first production car to be made almost entirely from aluminum, saving hundreds of kilograms compared to traditional steel. It was also considerably stronger than its rivals of the time. Other state-of-the-art features included a 4-channel anti-lock braking system and electric power steering to save weight. The wheels were forged billet aluminum and the tires were bespoke from Yokohama. Pininfarina returned to pen the looks, which were inspired by racing boats and the wraparound canopy of an F-16 Fighting Falcon jet fighter, giving superb visibility. Wearing North America's Acura badge, the new bright red NSX concept made it to the Drake Hotel for the 1989 Chicago Auto Show. There's always a bit of excitement in the air during press day, but this year's event is downright frenetic. Some of the cars shown here would define a generation. In one room, Nissan takes the wraps off of the totally redesigned 300ZX. In another, Mazda gives the sports roadster segment a shot in the arm with the MX-5 Miata. Even Lincoln manages to attract a crowd for the latest iteration of the town car. Lost in all of this commotion is Acura. Their booth is nearly empty. The company is sure what they've brought to show off will revolutionize the industry, but they aren't getting the attention required to make a meaningful first impression. Honda president Tadashi Kume becomes anxious. He gets up and tells the others on the panel that he's going to check on the car. Kume takes the cover off of the low-slung sports car. The Formula Red paint job dazzles under Drake's bright lights. It was made for moments like this. Some of Acura's staff glance over since this is the first time that they've seen it, but nothing seems out of the ordinary. Then Kume opens the door, slinks into the onyx leather bucket seat, puts the key into the ignition, and awakens the mid-mounted engine. This garners a bit more attention. They weren't supposed to start the car, at least not yet. The boss sends the throttle through the floor, and their confusion turns into real concern. Acura goes into a panic. Employees run over to Kume and try to get him to snap out of it, but he doesn't pay them any mind. He's entirely focused on the tachometer. His foot only eases off of the pedal when the needle approaches the 8,000 revolutions per minute red line. This is only for a moment. He punches it even harder, further amplifying its wail and potentially attracting unwanted attention. It's hopeless. Some of them believe that the event is ruined. The others on the panel can do nothing but wait for security to throw all of them out. This doesn't happen. Instead, the symphonic engine notes bleed through the walls and tickles the ears of writers who are attending other conferences. They followed the auditory breadcrumb and found themselves in Acura's room. The word spreads that there's a supercar next door. Soon enough, their booth is bursting at the seams. Kume's plan has worked to perfection. He ends the oral onslaught and exits the car to address the slack-jawed journalists. This is the NSX, and it will redefine what it means to be a sports car. Production started in June 1990, and demand was almost overwhelmed by the supply across the globe after the auto show. Originally, Honda planned to build 25 cars a day, but that doubled within a year. A rapturous reception from the motoring media only furthered its appeal, as it won group tests galore, despite often being the cheapest car in the lineups. When legendary designer Gordon Murray drove the NSX, while he was considering the design for a road car of his own, it immediately formed the benchmark for performance that eventually led to the McLaren F1. The first generation of the NSX was equipped with a mid-mounted, naturally aspirated 3.0-liter VTEC V6 engine. This engine produced 270 horsepower, allowing the car to reach an impressive top speed of 168 miles per hour. Customers had the option to choose between either a 5-speed manual transmission or a 4-speed automatic transmission. In November 1992, the NSX Type R was unveiled, also known as the NSX-R. Further lightened by a considerable 120 kilograms, thanks to the removal of insulation and the inclusion of extra aluminum, it had lowered, reworked suspension and lightweight NK alloy wheels, as well as a Momo steering wheel that ditched the airbag. Even the radio and air conditioning were removed. However, by this point demand was dropping. Not because the car was bad, but because the economy was taking a turn and fuel-thirsty sports cars were no longer a top priority for customers. Production dropped and prices soared. A revamp was needed. In 1996, USA buyers were offered the softer NSX-T with a folding Targa roof, which gave a small shove to sales, but it wasn't enough. So in 1997, a major update arrived with lighter components and a new 3.2-liter engine, making 290 horsepower. There was a small power boost and a tweak to the gearing too, as well as revised power steering and bigger brakes. That same year saw the introduction of the JDM-only NSX Type S. With the NSX Type R discontinued by this time, the Type S bridged the gap between that hardcore model and the base NSX. It ditched traction control and cruise control, which contributed to a big weight saving, and featured Recaro seats and a titanium gear knob. Another variant, the NSX Type S0, added stiffer suspension and jettisoned the sound system, aircon and soundproofing for an even lighter, more hardcore experience. In 1999, the US market got what was basically its own Type S. The NSX Zanardi was named in honor of Alex Zanardi, who had earned the CART titles for the previous 2 years. Only 51 were made, which makes it one of the rarest and most desirable NSX you can buy today. Yet, by this point, the sports car market wasn't what it was. A big change was needed. Okay, big change may be slightly overstating it. The new NSX, which was first revealed at the 2001 Tokyo Motor Show, was more of a heavy facelift than a ground-up redesign. Some 13 years after the first car arrived, the new NSX had new headlights, wider rear tires, different spring rates on rear suspension, and that was about it. Still, after the midlife updates that the car had already received, it was still very competitive against its competitors. The NSX Type R followed in mid-2002, with its carbon fiber bonnet and flat underbody for improved aerodynamics. But the revamp wasn't enough. In 2004, production moved from Tochigi to another factory in Suzuka. But the following year, the plug was pulled on the NSX. The final car, the NSX RGT, was only built because of homologation rules for the Japanese Super GT series. Over a 15-year period, 18,896 cars were made, but only 130 in 2005. There followed what NSX fans probably refer to as the wilderness years. Various hints were made at an NSX return, including an Acura-badged V10-powered concept in 2007, which contained visual references to the original NSX. But while some promising test mules were seen hooning around the Nürburgring shortly afterwards, later to become Super GT race cars, the 2008 economic crisis nixed any plans for production. After all, it was the fruit of a forbidden love that no one wanted.